There we go.
Thank you. How did I get started?
Yeah.
Well, I was born in Scotland on a council estate on the east coast of Scotland. One of 5 children. I was the second. I have an older sister, 3 younger brothers. And I didn't start in the world of employment until quite old, really. My father was in the Air Force, and so we were sent off to Southern Rhodesia, as it was then. And then he was posted to Innsworth in Gloucestershire. So I came to Gloucestershire and to Ribston Hall, a local grammar school, when I was 13, but had a really bad road accident when I was 15 and a half and left school. So I never did O-levels or GCSEs or whatever they were in those days. I never went to university. I got married before I was 19. I married an American from GCHQ and went off to live in Turkey and then America, and then came back to this country as a single parent with 2 boys to bring up, no education to speak of, living in social housing. I was fortunate enough to get some social housing. And then I had to knit my own career, as it were, because I didn't have a background education to start with. So I started as the sole provider for my children. And I can tell you that there's nothing more focusing than if you have people to support. You can't afford false pride or modesty, or this isn't good enough for me, or I'm not good enough for it. You just have to jump in and make the most of what you've got and then do the best you can. And that's what I did.
Yes. And so tell us, how did you get from coming back to the UK, 2 young children, as you said, no formal real education or bits of paper that could say anything, but yet you've made such amazing progress?
Well, partly, if you're not an educated person, or you're not part of the world that knows how things work, you don't know what you can't do. And therefore, you do things because necessity drives you. So my first job was a temporary job in a catering disposable foil company in Cheltenham. It was a 3-month job where I went along, and my job was to do office administration. And after about 3 weeks, I'd figured out what the job was. I did everything that I needed to do, and I could do more. So I offered to help with some of the cold calling they were doing because I had time. I'd sorted out, just using common sense really, the filing systems and managed phones and all sorts of things. And this is, I suppose, a clue for me. I worked out that my children were in school I lived in Churchdown, and my children were in school in Churchdown. And they used to go home to my mother every day, who also lived in Churchdown. And then I'd pick them up after work. But my father was ill and it wasn't convenient. So I worked out that when I first went to the company, I did everything I was asked to do. And then I'd added in more. So I did more. I did more than I had been paid for or asked to do. And then I worked out that I was worth more money. But I didn't want more money. I wanted to be able to leave at 3 o'clock so that I could be there for my children. So I asked to see the boss. Now, I didn't know there was a system of doing this. I just asked to see him. And when I went in to see him, he said, "Now, Mrs. Fritchie, yes, now why did I want to see you?" He couldn't begin to imagine I had put it in his diary. And so I said, I think you wanted to find out how I was doing. That's right, he said. How are you doing? How are things going? And so I explained that I had come in and I'd sorted the filing systems and I'd done a few other things and I'd expanded the job to do more. And I recognized it was worth more money, but I didn't want the money. And I talked about the money as if it was an actual amount of money. I mean, I wasn't being clever. I had it worked out in my head. So I said, I can do all you wanted me to and this extra and finish by 3, and that would really work out well for me. And so he then said, well, if that's all right with you. And then I recognized afterwards when I said, yes, it is, and thank you very much, and off I went. When I was telling someone, they said, how did you make that happen? And I said, well, I just worked out what would work for him, what would work for me, and then I put it to him. And they said, well, that was very clever. And I didn't think it was very clever at all. But I recognize that in my career regularly, I have looked at something I thought should be done or might make a difference. And then I've looked at how could I make it attractive from other people's point of view so they would support me in achieving this, whatever it was. Might not be for me, it might be a goal, an objective in the organization. But it certainly became a way of, rather than sitting and saying, well, I'm waiting for them to invite me or to recognize I'm good enough and so on. One of the things I recognized early on was you go for the jobs you want, not just the jobs you can get. And so I used to go for things. And then very briefly, I realized as I moved from company to company that supervisors could make life so much easier for the people, for staff, people like me. And I thought, well, if I could be a supervisor, I think I could be a good one and I could make life better for people and get the job done. And then I became a supervisor. And when I was a supervisor, I thought, actually, it's the managers. It's the managers who manage things who make the difference. They're upstream from the supervisors. How do you get to be one of those? And so I got to be one of those. And when I became a manager, I thought, but it's the senior managers who are dealing with things down the track, something more strategic. How do you get to be one of those? And then when I became one of those, I thought, actually, it's being on the board. It's the directors of the board that make the difference. And therefore, how do you get to be on a board? So I got to be on a board and I became chair of the board. And I realized that I wasn't driven by a sort of ambition. I was driven because there were things I wanted to do to make a difference. And I was driven because I had to earn money to feed my family. So that's a bit about my journey.
Yeah. So there's something there, Rennie, that strikes me as you were always working out what the next step was. You were kind of designing a little bit of it in your head, and then you'd the confidence to put that forward in somebody else's language nearly to influence them.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
I think that's fair. I think more than that, because that's linear, and I wasn't that linear. I always looked at options. I'm a great options person. Even if I was asking someone to get me train times, I wanted earlier and later as well as the most obvious one. So I would be saying, but what are my options? If I go by train, if I drive, what are my options? I know my sister said to me one day, when you die, we're going to put on your grave. She had no option but to go. But I was always looking at options. If this didn't work, then what else could I do?
Right.
So that I wouldn't be stuck.
Yeah, so you had more than one, different scenarios you were always looking at that you could put forward.
Yeah.
But it also strikes me that you've got this kind of calm sense of inner knowledge of yourself. There's something there that it's not rigid, but it's definitely very strong and not self-seeking, but you know where you want to go. Tell us something about how important it is to know yourself, for us all to know ourselves.
I think it's probably the most important thing. It's not so much where I want to go as what I want my life to be about, what I want to be doing. and so where I can make a contribution. And therefore, I think there are two things. First of all, know yourself, and secondly, have a purpose in life. What's your purpose? What's your purpose in doing anything, but overarching in your life? And I'll send them to you if people are interested in them. But I developed, because I was doing some work with people who'd had either they'd been made redundant or they'd had a big job or life change, I developed 2 fundamental questions and 7 strategy questions to help me figure out who I was and where I was going. And very simply, there's this. The first fundamental question is, what kind of human being do you want to be? And I described the kinds of skills, abilities, qualities, disposition, character, and understanding I wanted to have as a human being. And then, what do I want to do with my life? Well, then I was thinking not just in small ways, but large ways. What do I want my life's journey to be about? And then the strategy questions are quite simply, where are you? And I usually say to people, get a good notebook and write these things down. You're worthy of a decent hardback notebook. And so describe fully your current life stage, both personal and career. So I'm this age, living in this place, earning this money, with these relationships, where I am. Then how did you get there is the next question. Figuring out, looking back in your life and thinking about all the happenings or elements or events or people who influenced your life path so far. And then where do you want to go? So if you triangulate, this is who I want to be, and this is what I want to do with my life, and this is where I am, it gives me a direction of travel. And then how will you get there? And then you look at all the things that have helped you get here and the things that have got in the way and how you do something about those. And then what will you do when you arrive is my 5th strategy question, which is about you've got to be able to have some intentions. It's not just about arriving. I'm arriving and I want to do these things. And then where to next? Because life is a continuous journey. So when I've got to here, I want to be aiming in the right direction. If I'm in Birmingham and I want to go to Manchester, I want to get myself to the Manchester end of Birmingham before I set off for Manchester, not the Gloucester end of Birmingham. And finally, how do you begin? And then make yourself some lists. So if you like, I'll send these to you. And if anybody wants them, you're happy to pass them on. But those are my sense of who I am, I suppose. And then yes, I suppose knowing who I am and what my purpose is probably the most important thing. And my purpose changes as life changes and things happen. But I'm never lost, because I have stars to steer by. I know generally what direction I'm going in, and I know generally what I stand for.
And is that, when you're saying what you stand for, it would be fair to say that's like having values that you stand by?
Yes, I have strong values, and I think when you're challenged or life is difficult, or you have to make decisions about things, I think of it a bit like a spirit level, and I think of it almost right here, that in me is a spirit level, and the spirit level is a piece of wood with a glass tube and liquid in the tube and 2 little lines and a bubble. And so long as the bubble is between the 2 lines, you're upright.
Yeah.
So I think you spend your life, I think, first at home and then at school and then at senior school or university or work, people telling you what you should be doing and what's important. And I think there's a time in life where you begin to figure out for yourself and say, well, actually, this is actually more important to me than that is. So I stand for this, or I believe in that, like the truth, honesty, or what fun. It could be all sorts of things, interesting things. And so you begin to draw the line for yourself. And then you begin to know when you're being pushed. And I've redrawn the line several times. Things I didn't think were okay, I now think are okay. Things that I thought were okay, I now think, no, that's not. I mean, all of this work right now on Black Lives Matter, making everybody rethink everything. What microaggressions might there be that I have ignored?
Yeah.
And so therefore, having that spirit level in me, it's where my values are, it's where my integrity is, it's where I say it's fine for you to do it and I'm not judging you, but I can't do that. And that's what I stand for. So yes.
And that's something that we all can do just by interrogating ourselves to think, what are the values that I stand for? You know, where will I be pushed and where will I not be pushed, and hold on to those.
Absolutely.
It's very interesting what you were just saying there, that that's helped you sometimes in challenge. How would you say that you know, that helps you face up to challenges? I'm sure you must have had many a challenge over your long career.
I think I have, of course. If I just give an example, this is years ago. I was chairing Gloucestershire District Health Authority, and we were about to make some changes. In particular, we were going to change the purpose of the hospital at Over. There was a hospital there. It was for elderly people, and we used to, when people were elderly, they came into hospital, they just stayed there till they died. And then we decided and got a really good elderly person's doctor. And so his philosophy was, let's get people well. Once they're off their feet and not functioning, let's help people be at home and have a better quality of life. So we changed everything. And that meant that we then re-looked at what the purpose of this place was, and it was out of date. It cost a lot of money to run. We didn't need it anymore. We had other places, other things. And I remember going into a board meeting with a television camera outside from Bristol, the west of England, BBC, and a lot of staff and patients, relatives, shouting, throwing tomatoes, being very angry, because we were going to make a decision about this place at that board meeting. And then I was asked, could the television be in the room? And I said yes. And then I followed my instinct. I trust my instinct, not blindly, but if something feels sort of the right thing to do, I think I have to do something. So what I did was I brought the agenda item. I opened the meeting and I said, what we're going to do is bring agenda item 7 forward to being our first agenda item, which is to do with Over Hospital. And I know there are people in the room who feel that they haven't been heard. So I'm going to adjourn the meeting for at least 15 minutes, maybe 20, and I'm asking my board colleagues, because it was open to the public, to get up and go and speak to people in the room and hear what they have to say. And I could see the shocked faces of my colleagues thinking, why didn't she warn us? I didn't warn because I didn't know I was going to do that. But in the moment, that felt the right thing to do. And so we did. We got up, and there was a woman who had spat at me as I came in. So I went straight over to her and said, I clearly need to hear what you have to say because you're really very angry. And so then we had conversations, and I heard her and I heard others, and I listened to the buzz in the room till it became a hum, and a quieter hum. And then I got us back round the table, and then I opened the agenda item, and then we had a discussion, and some of the things that people had said in this room, we were able to answer those questions, and we made a decision, and the decision was to close that hospital. And then I said, I'm going to adjourn the meeting for 5 minutes if there's anyone who wants to leave. And I went, I stood up so that others could stand. And the woman I'd spoken to first came over to me and she said, well, I don't agree with what you're doing, but you usually bloody listen to me. Thank you. And we got to a decent place and we reused that money. We didn't take money out of the system. We reused that money in a good way. And so it's a rather long-winded, sorry about this, Louise, a rather long-winded explanation about taking a risk, difficult times, being true to yourself,
Yes.
that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Those sorts of times you can, if you know who you are and what you stand for, and you're not playing games, and you're sincere and honest, even if you're wrong, you're sincere and honest.
Yeah.
It matters.
But also there's something in there about, which is particularly coming to the fore at the moment, about leaders listening to others and bringing them in with you. Because that, in hindsight, that story is, it seems like, oh, that all ended very well, but it must have taken a lot of bravery to actually talk to those people who are so angry.
Well, yes, but they are just people, and we all get angry. And we mainly get angry and frustrated if people either don't listen to us or ignore us, or they're invisible to us.
Yeah.
And we had spent a year having consultations on this. So we had done a lot of other sorts of listening, but we needed to do that listening in the moment, I think.
Yeah. And you know, the thing is that sometimes in with the best of intentions, and even with knowing what our values are, sometimes we do get knocked over by challenges. Sometimes, you know, they just knock us sideways, and we really, for whatever reason, prejudice or unhealthy organization, you know, the thing, changes and decisions that we've nothing to do with us. What would you say to the people listening today about when that kind of thing happens? You know, when you fall over and you're just finding it a bit hard to get back up again.
I think there are two things. One is, if I take something, when you're not at one with the organizational culture and people are being challenging, and you might get really unpleasant feedback about yourself and what's wrong with you and what you're doing and your performance and all of that. Well, I always work out a way to deal with things. So I have what I would describe as ladybird book models of how to deal with things, simple models. And so if I had a bit of feedback about me being out of kilter, out of step with the organization, something, then I ask myself four questions. The first one is it true? Is it true? Is it valid to any degree? So someone might be saying, I'm this bad, and I think that's not true, or I've got this behavior, but actually I can accept this. I can see how they think that. So is it valid to any degree? And so instead of dealing with it emotionally, when someone gives you feedback and you're in a difficult situation, we don't take it in our heads and think, oh, this is interesting. We take it in the gut, and we feel bad, we feel upset, we feel emotional. And therefore, is it valid to any degree? Gets me thinking rather than just feeling. And then I might think, no, it's not. It's not valid to any degree. And then the second question I ask is, do I rate or respect the person giving me the feedback? All too often, we're devastated by feedback from people for whom we have little respect and no common values. I won't give someone that power in relation to me. So do I rate or respect the person? Well, I might think, no, I don't think that's right. But yes, I rate and respect that person. So I have a look again at what they're saying. But if I think, no, I don't, then I ask myself the question, is it important that I take notice? So this is my boss or my boss's boss. And so I might think it's not true, and I don't rate or respect them hugely, but actually it's my boss's boss. So my fourth question is, what can I do without compromising my integrity to demonstrate I've heard what they've said? I don't have to agree with them, and then I've got an action.
Yes.
So, and the other thing that helps me in those times is St. Barton's Ode. You talked about being knocked down. St. Barton said, I am hurt, but I am not slain. I will lie me down and bleed a while, and I will rise and fight again. I think that's wonderful, because
Yeah,
when we are
yeah,
hurt and someone says, are you all right? We say, fine, no, fine. Oh no, water off a duck's back. No, I'm hurt. I'm upset. This has affected my professional reputation, my feeling of myself. I'm hurt,
yeah,
but
yeah.
I'm not slain. I'm not out of the game yet. I will lie me down and bleed a while, gives me permission to go quiet, to go home, to say to somebody, make me a cup of tea, I've had a horrible day, look after me nicely tonight, please, I'll be all right by tomorrow, something. And then
Yes.
I'll rise and fight again. And those are the
Yeah.
sorts of things I would do in those kinds of circumstances.
So that importance of acknowledging when you do feel that you've been knocked a little sideways or knocked over a little bit.
Absolutely. When you've
Yeah.
been, really devastated sometimes.
Yes. Yeah. And also I think that's interesting what you just said there about remembering when you're feeling emotions and when you're thinking rationally. To be
Yeah.
able to separate, to allow yourself to have the emotions,
Yeah.
but to think.
To let my feelings settle rather than to drive me.
Yes, absolutely. That's really interesting, actually. Um, I mean, so often people say, there's a lot around about failure at the minute where people say, it's not failing. It's a kind of an opportunity to learn. What I can see you smiling there. What are you thinking about that?
Well, there's another poem. I love poetry. There's another poem that says, last night I dreamt marvelous error. There was a beehive in my heart, and golden bees were making sweet honey from my old failures.
Oh, lovely.
I think that's lovely. I think golden bees are making sweet honey from my old failures. If you failed and you just turn away from it, you wasted a really good failure. You might not be ready to, it's like if you've lost a tooth, you don't want to go digging in with your tongue right away, but when it's beginning to get better, you can have a little feel about it. So therefore, with a failure, how did it come about? Could I have done something differently? At what stage might it have been different? And so on. So I can do something about it. And I sit on quite a lot of appointment panels of leaders still, in national leaders of different things. And if it's a chief exec, I usually ask, tell us about a failure you had at work. How did it come about? What did you learn from it? Because I don't want to appoint someone to a senior job who can't own up to and own a really juicy failure. Because either they've never had one, so I don't know how they're going to deal with things if they go upside down, or they've had them and they've hidden them, and therefore they're going to manage in such a way as people won't bring them things when they're going wrong. And we need to know about things before they're a disaster.
Yeah, so in a way, they're not learning from their experiences.
No.
Really.
I think we need always to learn.
And that's a really important thing. And then sadly, we often learn a lot more from our failures than from our successes, actually.
Well, you're right. We enjoy success, but we learn from failure.
Yeah, absolutely. And around at the moment, I mean, there's a lot of I think people must be learning an awful lot, very quickly at the moment, with such a lot of change and disruption and so on that we've been going through. And I know you've been working with leaders in various charities in Gloucestershire. It might be just really interesting to know what you see arising out of those conversations you're having, Rennie, that maybe people can learn from for themselves.
I'm currently running 2 learning sets, virtual learning sets, of course, of chief execs of charities, smaller and local charities, medium-sized charities, because I feel when you're a chief exec, you don't have to be lonely, but it's always solitary. So it's good to have peers. And of course, everyone's asking questions about what kind of leader do you have to be today and so on. But what's interesting to me is that people are asking bigger questions about how has COVID and our response to it affected everything, and what's going to be changed permanently, and what might go back to normal. And there's a really interesting exercise. I've challenged some people I'm working with to do this. There's an exercise which says, and I'm not suggesting you all do this, but if you pick one that's interesting, a subject that interests you, it's called the STEEP exercise, STEEP. S stands for society, T for technology, E for the environment, E for the economy, and P for the political sphere. So STEEP, social, technology, environment, economic, and political. And then take each of those and have a look at, or just one that interests you, what effect has all of this had? So here we are doing this, which we would never have done, for example, in using Zoom. If so, on technology, doctors, the Royal College of Physicians fought for years the idea that you could do a consultation from a distance.
Yes, of course.
And they put it into place in no time flat. In society, in London, the government, the government there came to an agreement with the charities for homelessness, saying that they would have a policy and they'd agree by 2025, they'd get all homeless people off the streets. Because of COVID, they did it in 4 days. Their policy was 2025. So what does that tell us about how we work? Big organizations in the economy are saying, we thought if people worked from home, they wouldn't work, but they are. And so therefore, do we need
working more as well?
Absolutely. So do we need to have big office buildings, quite so big, and quite so many people there working all together? Of course, we need to go in. There's the social side of it and there's the meeting side of it, but we don't all have to be there. So I think lots of big offices are going to reduce the number of buildings, their footprint in every big city and otherwise. And then what's going to happen to Starbucks, who are there for all the people walking? So things are changing. And what I'm doing with people in Gloucestershire, and of course, politics, just look at the extraordinary happenings of last week and the week before about exams. Well, people were up in arms. It was changed. People power saying, this feels unfair. This is wrong. You have to do something about it. So things have changed. And the kinds of things that leaders are asking now is, how can I, as a leader, be equipped to understand what's really shifting in the world in terms of the number of volunteers? People came out to say, I will help. The kindnesses to neighbors, but also the hackers and the people who try to rip everybody off. There's all sorts of things happening. So trying to get your head around that and understand it a bit, to be able to get a sense of where the future is going to be going in these domains is a useful thing to do if you're a leader, or at least have enough to contribute to a conversation with other leaders so that you can come to some, not fixed, but some malleable view that can be changed when you observe more. And all you have to do is go on Google and technology again, but and say, type in how has COVID changed the economy, and you'll get dozens of papers. How has COVID changed technology? Dozens of papers. So you can thinkers are thinking and writing.
There about, in this world that we're living in, that leaders have to be able to deal with a little bit of and sometimes quite a lot of complexity. There's quite a lot of things changing and moving around you, and you've got to nearly be able to navigate that ambiguous sea, really.
Well, I think years and years ago when I started, a leader was the person who'd done whatever it was the longest and knew the most. And it isn't that anymore. We need people who have people working for them who know more than they do, but they have to know how to be able to formulate pictures and options and get people working together to be able
Yes,
to shift things along. And that's a different skill from
and
being the best sales manager.
absolutely. And it goes back again in that being able to listen, being able to bring people in with you, doesn't it? And you know, and that brings us on to something as well about bringing people in. Rennie, way back in 1975, with having more in the world. We've come a bit of the way, but maybe not all of the way. But there's a lot more there's a lot more that we need to do in terms of diversity of workforce. I was just really interested because I know a lot of people want to have a more diverse workforce, but when somebody joins a workforce that doesn't look like everybody else or isn't like everybody else, what would your advice be to being able to hold on to who you are in a place where maybe everybody else looks a bit different from you?
I suppose first, choose your battles. It's very wearing to react at everything that you might get upset about because people are being one of the ists, sexist, racist, any other kind of ist. And so it's not about agreeing with it, but it's about deciding what I'll die in a ditch for and what I won't. But also make a virtue of your difference. So I have often been the only woman in the room of senior people, and I won't ever take on the role of speaking for all women. How could I? We're all so very different. But because my life experience is different, very different to most of the men in the room who are at the board table, then I think it's reasonable for me to give examples from my life that I'm just thinking, something popped into my mind. I was chair of the Southwest Regional Health Authority, and I had 71 boards and 71 chairmen who reported through me to the Secretary of State for Health. And that covered Gloucestershire, Avon, Somerset, Devon, Cornwall, the Isles of Scilly, Hampshire, Wiltshire, Dorset, and the Isle of Wight. So huge area. And no, it's huge. It was the largest area in the country, largest regional health authority. And I used to meet every other month, all of us, the 8 regional chairs and the Secretary of State for Health. And we would be having, we'd have a dinner the night before with a topic, and then we'd have business and agenda the next day. And the topic one evening was, the Secretary of State then said, I'm being urged to close all local hospitals. They cost a lot of money, they're out of date, they're not being used well, all of them in England. What do you think? And so 3 of my colleagues spoke before me, and each said, a tough thing to do, but the right thing to do. Go ahead and do it, Secretary of State, absolutely. And yes, this is the right. And I thought, oh my goodness me. So I said, I'd like to tell you about my grandmother. And I could hear them, the man next to me thinking, oh my goodness, now what's she going to do? And I said, well, my grandmother shopped all her life at the Co-op. She had a number. And I remember it, 609 was her number in Scotland. And she had a dividend, a divvy, because she was a member of the Co-op. Well, in my experience, in the areas that I represent, people locally feel those local hospitals belong to them and they belong to it. You go into a house in the Forest of Dean and sitting on someone's mantelpiece would be 2 or 3 small bricks because they paid so much a brick to build this hospital. And therefore, it's not about logic and it's not about money. It is about, this is not the time when these other things need to be tackled, to take on having a big battle with people about a local hospital that they feel a personal relationship with. And so I would counsel against it. Now, I was using my experience, and there was a silence, and one of the men in the room who'd been Admiral of the Fleet said, "What's a divvy?" And I thought, well, there are several takes on what a divvy is, and I could give you an answer there, but I won't. And so I think make a virtue to some extent of your difference. I think it's a reasonable thing. And the last thing I would say about that is learn how to be assertive. There are 6 different types of assertion. I wrote a book about it. I made a film for the BBC on it. I run many assertiveness training courses over the last 25 years. And basically, it's not about muscling your way in. It's about empathetic assertion is where I would start, which is about understanding their point of view and then laying yours alongside it and then suggesting a way forward. So finding ways not to battle, but when you are ready to battle, to be clear about where your support is and what it is you're trying to do.
Yeah, it's such good advice, because the whole reason why you've been taken on when you're different from everyone else is for that very difference, actually.
Yes, but sometimes people around you are more uncomfortable.
Absolutely.
Well, the other thing I would say is there's and I know we have men and women on this Carl and Seth. This might not actually mean anything much to you, but others it might. There was something about 12 differences between men and women in the workplace, and I'll give you just 2 of them. The one is when men go into a meeting room, they go in, put their papers in, sit down, and are ready to start. But as women, we go in and we have our papers and our handbag, and we put this down, and then we start looking for that, and then we fiddle around. We're not ready to work. We're messing about. So I learned to get everything out that I would need to walk in, sit down, put my papers down, as opposed to going in my bag for a pen, then where's my hanky in case my nose runs, and all that stuff. That's not businesslike. It doesn't look workmanlike. So I'll do something. And the other is, and this should be of interest to both Seth and Carl, as well as the rest of us. Men nod when they agree. So if you're in a meeting and you're looking around and you see a man nodding, it's because he's agreeing with what's being said. Women nod to show they're listening.
Ooh.
So when we speak up later and say, well, I'm not sure I agree with that, a man will think, well, she's a loose cannon because she agreed a minute ago. and so now, because the verbal overrides the visual, if I haven't stopped nodding, but I say, I haven't made my mind up on this yet. So the verbal overrides it. I put a marker in so they don't just suddenly think I've gone crazy.
Ah, yes. Well, these are useful things to know, because like you say, they are where maybe you'll give a little bit to the circumstance that you're in, but always knowing where you're going to use your difference for change.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Now, I've been keeping an eye on the chat box, and there isn't any questions in there at the moment. So I'm going to just ask one last question, and then we'll just bring everybody up and see if people want to just ask it directly to you.
Okay.
One of the things I've always thought, Rennie, is that, we never stop learning, actually, as we go through. We always think, I remember years ago when I was really young thinking, oh, I think I've probably seen every scenario now. And then realizing, oh, no, it never stops. But I know that you have a lovely little trick that you do every year that kind of, in a broader way, adds to your own learning, and I'd love you to share it with everybody, because I think it's just really lovely the way you do it.
Well, yes, I've talked about it before, so I know you know about it. Between Christmas and New Year, I choose a watchword for the next year. I don't make a New Year's resolution because I can break that, but you could decide from the 1st of September, my watchword is going to be this for until next September. So you choose your own timing. And I choose a watchword for the year. I choose a word that I think, here's something that I need to, it's either a behavior or an area that I need to spend time on, or something I think is missing. So it might be balance. One year I chose balance. So I felt that my life I thought I needed to look at the pace because I was going too fast and I needed to slow down. Another time I chose joy as my watchword. I thought, you know what, there isn't enough joy in my life. I need to put myself in the way of joy. And joy is something, whether it's music or paintings or theatre productions, something that I will feel joyful about, or seeing my grandchildren more often, whatever it is.
Yeah.
So choose a watchword for the year. And usually it's a behavior or something I want to learn to be better at. And if I can practice it in every day, in every aspect of my life, take a risk. It could be about risk taking, balance your risk taking. And so I don't break my New Year's resolution, because every day I'm doing something. And at the end of the month, I think, well, how has the month gone for me on this word? And by the end of a year, I feel I've absorbed it. It's become of me. And then I'm going to be that as well. And I choose another word. So that's a watchword for the year.
Oh, very good. I think I just love that, actually. I'm going to do that from now on.
Good for you.
So we have a couple of questions coming in now. One is about, Carl is asking to what extent you kind of really controlled your path, or do you think there were other influences along the way? Because I suppose the way we've presented it today is you were very much in control. Do you think that's fair? Or do you think there were other things?
No, there have been other things. I mean, I've had a life like everyone else with ups and downs. My oldest son was killed by a hit and run driver when he was 28.
Oh, wow.
And so, you know, I've had jobs and lost jobs. And I've gone off in different directions. If people look at my career and things I've done, they've said, that doesn't seem logical to go from here to there. I once chaired a board for Tim Berners-Lee. For 3 years, I chaired the Web Science Research Initiative, and yet I still need my granddaughter to help sort out my computer. So I don't know, I don't know everything about that world, but I do know how to chair a board.
Yeah.
So what's driven me is making a difference and curiosity. Yeah. When someone comes and says, can I interest you in this? If it's interesting, I want to be involved. And there's a poem, I came across it, I've got it around here. So if I can't remember it properly, but there's a poem by Antonio Machado, who's a Spanish poet. And he says, traveler, your footprints are the only road, nothing else. Traveler, there is no road. You make the way as you go. As you go, you make the way. You make the way. And looking behind, you see the path that your feet will never travel again. Traveler, there is no road, only foam trails in the sea. Oh. I think that's lovely. So there isn't a career ladder or a one way. If I go off course, so long as I know who I am and what I stand for me, then I'm not lost. And I can be who I am and do whatever I think might be necessary in any different kind of sector that I happen to find myself in, because I'm in charge. I mean, you only have the one life. I'm in charge of at least how I sail my boat.
Yes, and I think that's important for people to hear, that you also have had ups and downs. One of the people in the group today is just saying that, you know, she's CEO of an organization she's been leading out of this crisis, and she's had a really hard time.
Yeah.
Not feeling very valued by the board, not feeling very supported, and just I really feel for her, because she's sort of saying, you know, one option is just to walk away. And has Rennie got any experience? Has Rennie got any expertise or advice to give me? I think she must be having a hard time.
Well, if you give her my email address, perhaps she would like to have a conversation separately. Yes. That's why I chose to run 2 learning sets of charity chief execs.
Yes.
Because they're in the same position and they're trying, and I thought one thing I can do in this time in Gloucestershire is to try and support the people who are doing extraordinary work,
Yeah.
who sometimes have boards that may not be as fit for purpose as they were before COVID.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that is really helpful. We'll hook you up there as well. And there was another question here, which was about just generally working as a leader in Gloucestershire. It's a very general question, but any what opportunities you think there are in Gloucestershire? Do you think it's a place of opportunity for leaders at the moment? That's from Tracy. I hope I've expressed
yeah,
that.
I think, Tracy, that it's I think there are opportunities all sorts of places, and I think you kind of make your own rather than sit and wait to see an advertisement and then think, well, maybe I should go for that, which is fine. But I remember someone saying to me that I was doing an assertiveness training work with this person, and she wanted a part-time job. So I said, well, I want you to do 3 things before we meet again to try and make something happen. You don't have to have a job, make something happen. So she was passing a shop, and it was a gift shop with nice things, and she thought, I'd love to work in a place like this part-time. But, you know, I don't know, these jobs come up very often. Anyway, knowing I was going to be asking her what she'd done, she went in. The owner, I've come into your shop before, and I'm standing outside thinking, I'd really love to work in a place like this. In fact, I'd love to work in this place. So if ever you need any part-time people, could I give you my name and tell you a bit about me? And the woman who owned the shop said, funnily enough, I haven't got round to it, but I was thinking I needed someone. By the time she came to the next meeting, she worked in that shop.
Step, isn't
so
it, yourself?
opportunity, yeah, and it doesn't happen every time. I mean, of course it doesn't. But when my children were growing up, there were, in women's magazines, there'd often be pictures of Janet and John up a tree, and a little cat sitting at the bottom of a cottage, and smoke curling, and trees, and so on. And it would say, hidden in this picture are 15 cats, find the hidden cats. And therefore, you'd look and you'd see a cat, and you look a bit harder and you'd see something in the swirl of the smoke. But then you had to keep turning the picture around to find the rest. Opportunities are like that. They're not necessarily obvious. So think about where you want to be, what kinds of things you want to be doing, what you want your life to be about. Then write to people who might be useful to say, can I just signal, here I am, I'm interested in this. So I'm not applying for a job, but if something comes up, or I'm happy to do some voluntary work or whatever it is. So be proactive rather, and yes, I think Gloucestershire is as full of those sorts of opportunities as anywhere else.